Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Higai Leadership. I'm here with my good friend Ana Alvarez Boyd, and she's an executive coach and author and amazing human being in general and a good friend of mine. And she's created a nonprofit called Fairways to Leadership, as well as a book on the experience called Fairways to Leadership, Building Your Business Network One Round of Golf at a Time, which is a pretty cool title as well. So Ana, thank you and welcome. Sorry to try for the first time, but thanks for coming.
Hi, Drew. It's so great to be here in conversation with you. And thank you so much. If it wasn't for you, I think I would still be trying to figure out what my Google domains are and how to begin. You helped me so well to begin and to maintain your friendship means a lot.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So you have an amazing story, and you've been kind of all over the place from leadership in the federal government to now being executive coach and running a nonprofit and author and a future astronaut potentially.
Well,
Pioneer.
we are in Central Florida, so yeah.
There you go. Right, Cape Pinellas right there. So, tell us a little more about your story. Share your story with folks and where you went to get here.
Yeah. So I am a first generation college graduate. I'm the oldest of three brothers. I grew up in California, really very working class family. My mom is an Italian immigrant. My father was first generation Mexican. So it's an immigrant story, right? Very, very much. Hard work moves you forward. That kind of mentality. I grew up in the 60s and 70s in San Francisco, California. So you can imagine, right? Like I saw every band you could possibly imagine growing up. But I also, so I have a great appreciation of music, but also of social change, right? I went to Catholic school, and the nuns had a really important impression on me about what social change could be, right? We were protesting the Vietnam War. We were, praying for the war to end in our classrooms. We were, we watched Watergate happen. God bless the nuns. They made us watch the whole thing on our CTVs in our classrooms. So all of that to say, right, I was very much the product of that moment, that time, that social change that was going on in the 60s and 70s. And I started my career as a social worker in Los Angeles with the homeless, mentally ill. And then my life took this sharp turn into banking. It was just happenstance. I needed a job. My father had gotten ill and he died very suddenly. And I needed a job, and I took a job in a bank. And I worked my way up really quickly and realized, that there were other things to do. So I ended up working in the federal government in community development. And so my entire career, I did 27 years in the federal government, and had my career was really about community development, about listening to communities, looking at housing options, looking at entrepreneurship, at small business, access to capital, all of those things. In the last 14 years of my career, I worked at the Federal Reserve. I was very senior executive there with, oversight of community development, both nationally, and worked really closely. I got a chance to work really closely with amazing people, with Chair Powell, with Janet Yellen, and with Ben Bernanke, through all the recent crises of our time. So, but after the end of the pandemic, I was a little tired, and wanted to really help the next generation of leaders come along. So that's how I came into coaching, was, thinking about what my next role was going to be, and how I could make an investment in the future leaders. Yeah.
That's, I mean, it's unbelievable, the things that, when you say them out loud, then it becomes ridiculously obvious how much has changed in the last, since the 60s and 70s. I mean, it's a different world. And just since the 90s is a different world, right? From the 60s and 70s, it's a different universe. So, I mean, you think about today now, and I'm digressing a little bit from what we're talking about, but I'm just curious, from your perspective, having been through and lived through and honestly fought through some of the things in the 60s and 70s and the struggles of today, right now, and the way the kind of things are right now. What are the similarities and differences that you notice in terms of the way that social change is happening and has happened in the years?
Mm-hmm. God, that's a great question. I would say what's similar is that there's still a groundswell of advocacy, right, from every corner. And I think we saw that in particular after the murder of George Floyd, right?
Mhm.
The really that grassroots anger and the need for change that leading into that was very, very present when I was growing up. And it was important. It's the motivator, it's the activator, right,
Mhm.
that we need to move forward. So that I think that very much so. What's different is the social media and the disinformation,
Yeah.
and I think we're battling that both politically and thinking about social change. What is true anymore is difficult to know, and I think and
Yeah.
that gets in the way of social change, of really thinking about what the right thing is. And it's something for us to continue, and I think as coaches, right, as we coach leaders, thinking about what is it that is true, right, really
Mhm.
asking that, what do you know to be true, and what environment do you want to create for the truth to be able to coexist, right?
Yeah.
Right, with other things. And so I think that's the difference. Thank you for that question. That's a great, really thoughtful question.
No, I mean, I'm genuinely curious because again, most of us come from the lens of the last, I don't say most of us, people my age come from the lens of people because I wasn't alive. I mean, not a knock and not an ageist comment, but just I don't know what that world was like. I know what I've seen on TV, I know
Right.
what I've seen in the news, but I never lived through that kind of
Yeah.
change, of social change, right? And I heard my parents talk about it. I've heard other leaders talk about it, but I've never heard that direct comparison, the way that you just articulated it, right? And I think you know being on the front lines then and being on the front lines now are two different things. To your point about social media, I feel like nowadays, and tell me if you see something differently, but I see it as back then you were on the front lines because you cared and because you wanted to see it make a difference. I think there's still people who care. I think there's a lot of those people who care, and I think there are also those people who care are being drowned out by the people who just want to make noise and want to look like they
Mhm.
care, right? And want to
Mhm.
just be recognized for. They want recognition more than they want to care, more than they actually want change. What do you see from your perspective?
Well, there's a environmental factor that's different too. Now that you mention it, it is that in the 60s and 70s, our and they were mostly boys, right? Our boys were dying in
Mhm.
another country.
Yeah.
We're not actively in the same way at war, and yet we're still, fighting for democracy, and thinking about truth and trying to figure out what is true, what is not true. And so I don't know that I can speak to individual motivations so much
Sure.
as I know the urgency is different. Back then, it was mothers, right, and
Mhm.
families saying, "Bring back my son,"
Yeah.
right? And we're not in that same situation. That sense of urgency isn't there in the same
Mhm.
way. It's still until it's a little bit intellectual, and I think social media has made it even more intellectual. And that's tricky, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't have the same, we were watching the numbers when I was growing up of deaths, and they were our deaths. They weren't, it wasn't in another country, in another place. It was different.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, and that's why this is why I asked because I didn't honestly I didn't even consider the concept, the idea of that this is these are mothers talking about their sons and their husbands and their
Yeah,
brothers, right? And that wasn't that's not a perspective that I was even familiar with or even would have considered. So thank you for the answer. And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
no, it's
And
interesting to think
we
about.
live in complex times, right? Like
Yeah,
we talk about this all the time as coaches. It's complex and ambiguous, right? What
yeah,
is it, Dukkha, right? Volatility. and that we're not, the answers aren't clear, and we're not sure at any given time what's true. So finding that internal compass
Yeah.
and, being in a place of reflection, and clarity is hopefully what we can bring people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we live in the gray, right? Like as coaches, we live in the gray and help people find their way through that. Along the same lines, in terms of that world, which is actually a nice segue back to what we were here to talk about. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
But in terms of your work as a coach, what inspired you to start Fairways to Leadership? Because it's an amazing. I mean, if you want to talk about that briefly, because I don't think, just in case folks don't know about it, tell us more about Fairways and what brought you to that.
So, very, very similar, very apropos to the conversation we were just having. After the murder of George Floyd, it's June of 2020, and my husband and I are in Central Florida. He's a professor at UCF. And wow, right? We looked at each other and said, what do we do? Like so many people around the country, we're like, what do we do? And so we protested, right? We did all of those things because I'm still a child of the 60s and 70s. And so I did that stuff, but it wasn't satisfying in the same way, right? That it had been back in the day. And so we did the simplest thing. It seemed at the time like just a drop in the bucket. We invited a group of students, really diverse group of students. UCF is one of the most diverse schools. It's the third largest school in the country, and it's one of the most diverse schools that you will ever find. And so we invited this group of students to the golf course, and we said, at some point in your life, someone is going to ask you if you play golf, and it can be a business imperative for you. We want you to have the choice to say yes. And so what ended up happening, like we literally thought 3 weeks, they get some skills, we have some fun, everybody's outside, right? It was that point in the pandemic where we're 6 feet apart on the golf, and you could do that in Central Florida on the golf course. You could do that.
Yeah.
And so, we did that, and then they kept coming back, and they kept asking for more. And we were sort of like, what's going on here? So, and then one day, a young Black man stopped us and said, I love what you're doing here, but you need to teach me how to show up for this. You need to teach me how to be here, how to take my place in this. He goes, I sat in the parking lot and I looked around and there was nobody that looked like me. And I thought about whether or not I was going to get out of the car. And I got out because you asked me to be here. Right. So the warm invitation in golf is like a really important thing. Yeah. But we didn't realize until he challenged us that it could be so much more. So because we had time, we had a lot of time, we took our creativity and we put our skills together, and we created a 6-week leadership development program that uses the golf course as the classroom. So we have there's adaptability, curiosity, strategy, right? I know you play a little bit of golf, Dhru. When you're on the tee for the first time and everybody's watching you, right? Like what leadership skills are you using, right? You're showing up in a certain way. And so we took all of that. We took that nervousness, we took that sense of newness, the ability to connect with other people who you may have never met, and yet that you want to know, right? And that have business impact for you. We took all of that and we made it a leadership program. So fast forward to today, that was June of 2020. We're now in 12 universities in 5 states and the District of Columbia. We've graduated over 500 students. And I always get emotional about this because that young man who challenged us in the parking lot, he's our first executive director.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
And I do this every time. Like when I think about the transformation, I always get emotional because all of those students, we have students who we've graduated from Barry University Law School. They're at Howard Law School. We're at FAMU Law School. They go to their first jobs in these firms and they're able to play in the charity scramble. Mm-hmm. They're able to say yes. right? And now we're growing, we're growing strategically. We're thinking a lot about what the future looks like. It's a very powerful program.
Mhm.
And we're 70% women, 60% students of color. And we're starting our first Native American cohort in North Carolina this year.
Wow.
Like it's gone from a warm invitation to, something that's transforming students' lives. It has been such an important learning journey, for me and for Eric. We've learned so much from the students, and now from Dylan, who is taking over the reins. Like, I could not be prouder of that outcome, right? And it could not be more ironic. Right? There was very much a competitive process, and he came out on top. He left college. He went to the PGA for several years, and now he's come back around to lead this program.
That's incredible. I mean, there's so much there that's praiseworthy, frankly. I mean, first, just from the idea alone it's amazing, because there is that barrier, right? That barrier of not feeling like you belong. And to your earlier point, I do not play golf well at all. I played maybe 5 times in my life, and I don't really play for that reason, because one of the reasons is I don't really feel at home there, right? At the golf course. I never really have. The few times I played with with like friends that I knew. I would never go to the golf course by myself, because it doesn't feel like a place that I would go to. Because it's not like anything as anyone who's ever said anything to me directly or anything like that. But it's just, I don't see anyone or feel like anyone there can relate to me, really. And I can't really relate to other folks there, outside of my own group. And I'm sure that similar feeling, or worse, is how other folks feel. And especially if you grew up in places that I grew up in, that a lot of these kids grew up in worse places, right? And not relating to that is a barrier, because as we all know, many of the deals that happen on the golf course. And if you're not even, forget being invited or welcomed, if you don't even feel like you can be there and feel comfortable there, or feel even remotely comfortable there, right? Then what happens to your chances of getting those deals, right? So you're ruled out before you even get a chance to play.
Completely. Right? Let me tell you a story. There's a young woman who we met early on in the process, and she was a young professional. She said, what's happened to me is that when it comes time for performance reviews, the guys who play golf, they go and they spend 4 hours if you're good, right? 4 hours on the golf course with the boss. I get 30 minutes in his office. Mm-hmm. Right. And so even there, right, the inequity of that, right, of access, just having access, just understanding. So the book we wrote so that more people could have access. And there are stories of, the inequities of golf, some of our own stories, some of, stories from people that we've met, people who are on our board. And then it goes through some leadership lessons, right? Here's the leadership access that you have. Here's how you can practice leadership by learning this game that's a little funky and a little hard, right? But it's got a lot of potential.
Yeah.
Right. And here you go. And you also, woven throughout the book, are also the rules of golf. So it's kind of an overall manual of like, hey, here's how you can think about this. Not just here's the rule manual, right? But here's how you can think about this. And here's your opportunity to lead while you learn this really funky, hard game.
No, that's amazing. And again, it lends itself so well to a book and to a program, and to this whole continuum that you've created with these folks. Like the system of really developing young people to really take that next step and be integrated into the leadership of these big companies, right? I mean, that's phenomenal. And I think of as you were talking, I was thinking about a conversation I had about this before, which is resilience, right? And the idea of how do you build resilience? And one of the best ways to do that is sports. And golf is one of those sports where, and I call it a sport now. I wouldn't have called it a sport 5 years ago, because I'm still not a great fan of it. But that's my own personal story. But it's one of those things where sports really help you to build resilience. And in a sport like golf, where you can only really rely on yourself and you have yourself, maybe a caddy if you're lucky, but yourself, right? It's you and the ball and the club, whatever club you chose,
Right.
right? That's
Right.
it. And if you let yourself get into and get in your own head, it's going to show in the shot you make, right? Or don't make.
Oh, completely. Yeah. Completely.
Have you
Yeah.
seen the movie The Legend in the Bagger Vance?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. That movie is really, really interesting to me. Even growing up, even knowing nothing about the sport of golf, I loved it because it was so philosophical and spiritual in a very accessible way, in the way that
Mhm.
they described in the way that Matt Damon's character and Will Smith's character kind of like interacted, and that like
Yeah.
that dynamic was really cool. But also just the game of golf that made me interested in the game of golf. And then I tried and I had no interest anymore.
Mm.
But it was really interesting though how he had to get how he had to see the ball and like let everything else fade away. I think that's so true in so many situations, in leadership situations. So when you're
Yeah.
talking about these things with these kids, you know, what's the first thing that you do when you interact with them? What's the first lesson you teach to them? I mean, if you want to, I don't want to spoil the book, but what's the first the first thing you talk with them about?
Well, we build their game, right? So we start with putting and then chipping, and then they can be on the fairway, right? Starting to build a swing, and then eventually full swing, and then we'll take them out for a 4-hole graduation round, where we throw them in a cart with someone they've never met, with donors and sponsors, and people, leaders in the community, and like, okay, go show them what you've got. And that is a really wonderful experience for a lot of people. For everyone that it comes to that. One of the first things I tell them is to get out of their own head,
Hmm.
right? And to breathe, that you learn the mechanics, just like anything that you practice, anything that you start to learn, right? You learn the mechanics of it, and then you let go. So there was a young woman who from STEM, her background is STEM, and these are like some of my favorite young people. I shouldn't say I have favorites, but the ladies of STEM are so much fun to see them learn to play golf, because they have no barriers to it, right? Like they haven't necessarily played softball or stuff like that. So they come to it and they're like, oh, yeah, I can do this. And it's physics, right? So they sort of understand it at a different level. It's really fun to watch them grow. But this one young woman, she recently wrote in a post that the most important thing I told her was to just breathe.
Hmm.
I would come up to them as they're like gripping the club and they're, you know, full of anxiety. Just breathe. And when your putt's going to be so much better, right? Let it go, let it roll. It's going to go where it will. Just breathe. And then it's a good lesson for life as well. The thing about the cohorts is that they're all at the same level, right? So you were talking earlier about going out there and feeling that sense of intimidation. They learn together at the same level.
Mhm.
Right? Some of them go on and buy golf clubs and do other things. They go to alumni activities that we put on. But most of them are just knowing how to grip a club, knowing how to be in a scramble, right? Which is a pretty easy format. Whoever hits the ball longest, you go there and you hit it again. And it's as long as you've got somebody who's like good in the fairway, somebody who can putt, you're all right. Right? It's a fun afternoon.
Yeah.
And you're making friends, you're making connections, you're outside. Right? There's so many good things about it. And everybody's learning together. They're all building skills together. And the sense of empowerment that comes from that, it's transformational.
Yeah. I can only imagine. I mean, that sounds fantastic. Brings up two questions for me. First of all, can adults join your program? Because I might need that help. Um, but more seriously, though, you know, what's next? Because you guys have done so much already, and it's. I mean, obviously, there's a lot more to do in terms of the programming, and it's got the sky's the limit, right? But what's next for you?
I've been thinking a lot about um, how to take this program to young professionals who are already, in the EYs of the world, and who we're serving a certain niche. We're serving college students who never imagined that this game was for them,
Mhm.
basically, right? Who've never had a club in their hand, who we call it like everybody who missed first tee. This is, this is your program at the college level, right? With, a pretty sophisticated rendering of what you should be thinking about as a leader and how to apply that in your job. But we've had some folks approach us, about what about the young professional? And I think that's another maybe market that we should be thinking about. We do want the nonprofit to support the book, by the way, is owned by the nonprofit, and all the proceeds from sales of the book go to the nonprofit.
Nice.
It's a perpetual gift. And so, that's the thing, like how do we get this into the hands of more people? The game is growing, but is access really growing? Like who actually gets to play, who actually gets to be on the course making those deals, paying attention to that and keeping up the tension around that is important. I brought a group of Latinas who I did a retreat with around this time last year. We were in Central Florida. We were at a public golf course. We were the only women and the only people of color in a very, very large, like, eating area, restaurant area. It was very obvious, right, that we're not there yet. So continuing to like keep that drumbeat rolling, I think, is an important outcome. And thinking about maybe a program for young professionals. So can adults join? We have a thing about, like, it has to be the young
Sure.
person. We're in one lane. We've had a lot of people approach us about, will you do this for youth? And there's so many youth programs. There's tons of them. But there isn't anyone really doing this for the college student, for the young adult. Yeah.
No, I appreciate the answer. The question was obviously slightly facetious, but no, I love that you're thinking about that next step, though, in terms of the young professional, how to serve them and make sure that they, because there is that demographic of folks who are in that world, and like you said, the folks, like the woman you spoke with, who said, like, she has 30 minutes with her boss, and these other folks have 4 hours. The secret that she doesn't know is if she goes out there and she could spend 8 hours on the course with her boss, because if she's not good, because then that would serve her even better, No, that's amazing and absolutely fantastic. And for those of you who are curious about the book, it will be available. The link to the book will be in the description, so please do check that out and please pick that up. Anna, one last question before we go, which I ask all my guests, and that is, who or what has inspired you on your amazing journey? You've had so many things that you've done over the years, and all of them fantastic. You've been excellent in all of them, obviously. So what drives you? Who drives you along the way?
I want to tell you a quick story.
Sure.
During my federal career at the Federal Reserve, I was working for Janet Yellen, and I had applied for a big job. Another like really like division director level job. And and I did fine in the interview process and all of that. And but I obviously didn't get the job. And so, when you don't get a big job like that, you start thinking about what's next. One day I get called to go meet with Janet, like 30 minutes with Janet alone. Really? Like that, like, you're sort of like, what did I do? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
She brought me to her office, and she sat me down, and she said, I care about you. I care about the work you do. Please stay. It cost her absolutely nothing to do that. But it gave me so much inspiration about how to be a fearless leader, how to be kind at a level that is just completely extraordinary, how to transform the outcome, right? And I went on to grow a bunch of new programs, working closely with her to, feel completely renewed in my career, just from that, like, single act of kindness. And it has really it's left an enduring impression on me, and helped me to think about, and how can I be investing in the next generation? How can I be giving back? What should I be? How do I show up? Right. And it's an essential question for leaders. How do you show up? How do you want to show up?
Yeah.
On that day, she showed up as just an extraordinarily kind and clever person, right? Not wanting to lose the connections that I had in the community, and the momentum and the sense of cohesion, right? That
Hmm.
was needed on the team. And so that was a really inspiring moment for me. I also read an enormous amount of poetry. I find it to be incredibly soothing to the soul. I like to think outside the box that way. Um, so that's some of what I'm up to.
That's amazing. I mean, yeah, that's an amazing story. It's really because it illustrates so many qualities of great leaders that,
Mhm.
and it's so subtle too. Like you said, it's not a big, huge show of like, oh, I'm gonna buy, the entire office massive, it's not anything like that. It was a very simple, free. It costs her nothing to do that,
Yeah, yeah,
inspirational moment. So
yeah,
that's fantastic.
yeah.
Uh, Thank you so much. I mean, I think all of our viewers and listeners and whatever media you're looking at this on, can feel the passion that you have for what you do, and just what you bring to the table to all of the students that you've served and all the people that you're going to serve with your nonprofit. And honestly, thank you so much for all that you're doing for everybody. So, for those of you who want to connect with Anna, her information will be in the chat, in the description box below, and in the show notes on the podcast. But Anna, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today and sharing your
Thank
story.
you, Drew. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Always.
Likewise. Everyone, take care, stay safe. We'll catch up soon.